I stepped into the restaurant and instantly knew something was wrong. My parents' anniversary dinner was already finished. Plates cleared, wine glasses sweating on the table. The kind of quiet that comes after money has been spent. My mom looked up and smiled that soft smile she uses when she's about to ask for something. "Oh, you're late," Stephanie said lightly. Then, like it was a joke we'd all rehearsed, she added, "You don't mind covering the bill, right?" My sister Catherine laughed. Still as clueless as ever. I realized I'd been invited exactly when their meal ended. $7,500. My name is Olivia, and for 30 years, I had always played the role of the easy and understanding daughter in my family's eyes. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for an itemized breakdown or point out that $7,500 was more than my monthly mortgage. I reached for the leather folder, pulled my card from my wallet, and handed it to the server without a word. This wasn't because I was weak, and it certainly wasn't because I felt the warm glow of family loyalty. I paid because I needed one last clean data point. I needed a final, undeniable confirmation that I wasn't imagining the pattern of their systematic draining of my life. On the drive back to my apartment, the city lights blurred into long, cold streaks against the windshield. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from my mother, Stephanie. "Thank you for handling that. We knew we could count on you." No heart emoji. No actual warmth. Just the clinical relief of a manager confirming a task had been completed by a reliable employee. For 30 years, I had been the easy daughter. I was the low-maintenance child, the one who didn't throw tantrums, the one who worked 3 jobs to pay for her own degree while Catherine spent our parents' money on sorority fees and designer shoes. My silence had become a prison without bars, an invisible chain of survival. In our house, being quiet was the only way to earn a pat on the arm and a half-hearted, "Olivia understands." But understanding had become a role that came with heavy invoices. Over the last 5 years, I had become the silent infrastructure for their lifestyle. It started with groceries, then utilities, then a temporary loan for Catherine's credit card debt that quietly became a permanent loss. I had allowed them to underestimate me, letting them believe my landscape architecture business was just hired lawnmower, a modest job that explained why I didn't talk about numbers. I realized tonight that they didn't see my generosity as love, they saw it as a subscription service they were entitled to. I was the spare table they used to hold the things they didn't want to carry themselves. This was the mechanism of survival I had built, keep the peace by paying the price. I was a survivor of a long-term emotional audit, and the invisible chain was finally starting to snap. I sat in the dark for a long time before I finally opened my laptop. The screen glowed, steady and honest, reflecting in the glass of water I hadn't touched. I didn't open my design files or my project timelines. I opened the folder I had been adding to for 5 years without ever naming it out loud. I called it infrastructure. Inside, it wasn't a collection of memories, it was a balance sheet of my own exploitation. I scrolled through the entries slowly. Entry by entry. $180,000. That was the total. It wasn't the number that shocked me, it was the timeline. It showed exactly how early it had started and how quietly it had grown. Every emergency loan for Catherine that was never mentioned again. Every utility bill for my parents' house that I started covering temporarily 3 years ago. Every travel expense for trips I was never actually invited to join. Together, they told a story that had nothing to do with generosity and everything to do with a system. I realized I wasn't a daughter in their eyes. I was an unpaid silent investor in their version of a successful family. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, assuming the account would never close. This was the trap of cruel normalization. Stephanie and Thomas hadn't stolen from me in one giant heist, they had done it in 1,000 tiny, reasonable-sounding increments. They had turned my role as the irresponsible child into a permanent obligation, making my financial support feel like a background noise they no longer had to notice. They had normalized the draining of my resources, until they felt entitled to it. Caleb walked into the room, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He didn't ask what I was doing. He never did. He just set one down beside me and waited. They didn't even pretend tonight, I said, my voice sounding more clinical than angry. He nodded slowly. They didn't have to. That's what people say when they think you'll never stop. I looked at the screen again, at the lines that had once felt like kindness but now read like a bad contract. I had been paying for a subscription to a family that only delivered when I footed the bill. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon the old guilt or a single shred of regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. This was accounting. This ends, I said. Caleb didn't cheer. He just asked who I wanted to talk to first. I already knew. I didn't need a therapist or a shoulder to cry on. I needed my attorney, the one who handled my business boundaries, not my emotions. I closed the laptop, not because I was finished, but because the plan was now concrete. I wasn't going to announce my departure or send a long, emotional text they could use against me. I was simply going to stop participating in the system. I knew the moment I did, the collapse wouldn't be loud. It would be immediate. The family group chat pinged at 3 in the morning. I didn't have to check the screen to know who it was. Catherine had posted her itinerary for a 3-week luxury tour of the Amalfi Coast and Paris. The screenshots were a parade of 5-star hotel confirmations and private boat charters. The total came to $40,000. Her caption was simple, finally getting the break I deserve. Family is everything. A few hours later, my mother followed up. There was no, how are you, or even a thank you for the $7,500 dinner I had paid for 48 hours ago. Her text was a reminder of my family obligation. She called it the Gilded Vine Legacy Fund. It sounded noble, like we were building a scholarship or a museum. In reality, it was just the name she gave to the account I used to subsidize their credit card debt. She wrote, Olivia, we noticed the monthly transfer didn't hit the fund this morning. Catherine needs to secure her flights today. Please handle it by noon. I sat in my office at my firm, looking at the high-resolution architectural blueprints for a $3 million resort project I was currently leading. To them, I was just a hired lawn mower, a gardener with a steady paycheck. They didn't see the complexity of my designs or the years of specialized engineering I had mastered. They only saw my utility. They were trying to use my professional success to fund the very person who mocked it. It was the ultimate, the trap of cruel normalization. They had successfully turned my survival skills into their convenience. I didn't reply to the group chat. I didn't send an angry emoji or a defensive paragraph. Instead, I picked up the phone and called my financial attorney. It was time for a professional escalation. I told him I was revoking every authorization tied to my parents' accounts and my sister's credit cards. Every recurring payment, every emergency overdraft protection, and every utility draft I had been covering, I wanted it all severed by the close of the business day. The subscription to their reality was about to expire. My attorney's voice was as clinical as my own. Are you sure, Olivia? Once the stop payment orders go through, it will be immediate and irreversible. I looked at my laptop screen, at the $180,000 of lost infrastructure, and I didn't blink. I'm sure, I said. I'm done being the silent investor in a version of family that treats me like an ATM. By noon, I had signed the legal notices and watched the authorized status on their accounts flip to a revoked one by one. I didn't feel the panic I had expected for years. I felt the kind of peace that comes when you finally clear a debt you never actually owed. I knew the fallout was coming. I knew the phones would start ringing and the accusations of being selfish would fly. But as I went back to my blueprints, I realized that I wasn't the one causing the collapse. I was just the architect who had finally decided to stop holding up a building that was designed to crush her. The silence that followed the revocations didn't last long, but it was the most peaceful 3 hours of my adult life. I sat in my office, watching the shadow of a maple tree stretch across my drafting table, feeling the weight of 5 years of draining slowly lifting. I was no longer the silent investor in their version of a successful family. I was an architect standing in the ruins of a structure I had finally stopped supporting. My phone sat face down, a silent witness to the frantic notifications I knew were piling up on the other side of the glass. The interruption came from my attorney, Marcus. He didn't call to tell me about my parents' protests, he called because his audit had uncovered something that moved this from a family drama to a criminal investigation. Olivia, he said, his voice dropping into that low, professional register that signaled a lethal discovery. It wasn't just the automatic transfers you authorized. He explained that while I had been revoking the standard payments, he had flagged a single, manual transaction on my corporate line of credit, the one I kept exclusively for large-scale landscaping materials. There is a $40,000 deposit for a Mediterranean heritage tour booked under Catherine's name, Marcus stated, his words hitting with the precision of a gavel. My stomach didn't drop, it turned to ice. That trip Catherine had been bragging about in the group chat wasn't funded by a loan she hoped I'd eventually cover. It was funded by a forged digital signature on my business line of credit. My mother and my sister hadn't just been asking for my generosity, they had been stealing from my future while laughing about how clueless I was. Forgery is a felony, Olivia, Marcus reminded me, but I was already looking at the digital confirmation on my screen. The signature looked like mine, a clumsy imitation of the hand that designed million-dollar resorts, used to buy 3 weeks of champagne and boat rides for a sister who saw me as a cash cow. This was the kill shot, the moment where any remaining path to redemption for them was permanently erased. They weren't just ungrateful, they were criminals masquerading as family. A new text from Stephanie popped up, breaking the silence. It was an invitation to a makeup anniversary dinner at the Gilded Vine for the following Saturday. We need to clear the air, honey. Everyone will be there. Let's act like a family again. I stared at the message, thinking about the $40,000 theft sitting in my inbox like a ticking bomb. I didn't feel fear or hesitation. I felt the cold, sharp finality of an executor. I'll be there, I typed back. I wasn't accepting an invitation to a dinner, I was accepting the role of the person who delivers the final accounting. As I closed my laptop, the screen glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and the quiet retribution of someone who had finally learned their own worth. I arrived at the Gilded Vine exactly on time. I wasn't the late guest coming to clean up the remains of a meal anymore. I was the guest of honor at my own execution, or so they thought. Stephanie, Thomas, and Catherine were already seated at the best table in the house, the one with the panoramic view of the vineyards. The table was already crowded with appetizers and 2 bottles of $500 vintage wine. Catherine was holding court, waving her hand so the light caught her fake tan skin as she talked about the essential luxury upgrades she'd added to her Amalfi Coast itinerary. Nobody looked up when I sat down. It was a choreography they had practiced for years. The dinner was a parade of entitlement. They ordered the $300 seafood tower and the dry-aged wagyu without glancing at the prices. My father, Thomas, laughed louder after his second glass of scotch, discussing a real estate opportunity that he expected me to look into, his code for a down payment. My mother leaned back, her soft, manipulative smile firmly in place. You look so serious tonight, Olivia. You really should learn to relax like your sister. Catherine has such a natural grace for the finer things. I didn't respond. I just watched. I was taking one final audit of the people who saw my career as a gardening business, but treated my bank account as a shared utility. When the dessert plates were cleared, the server approached with the familiar leather folder. She placed it neatly in the center of the table. The conversation didn't stop, but the energy changed. It was the quiet that comes after money has been spent. No one touched the folder. They simply waited for me to perform. My mother tilted her head, her voice like honey mixed with glass. Whenever you're ready, dear. We figured since Catherine is so busy preparing for her heritage tour, you'd want to take care of this anniversary makeup dinner. The total was $5,200. I didn't reach for my bag. I signaled the server. Could you ask the manager to come over for a moment? I have a question about the account authorizations. The table froze. Catherine stopped scrolling through her phone. Olivia, what are you doing? My mother hissed. Don't be dramatic. Just handle the bill so we can go. The manager, a man who had processed nearly $100,000 of my money over the years, arrived quickly. I kept my voice calm, factual, and lethal. Hi. I just wanted to confirm the payment arrangements for this table. The manager checked his tablet, his expression shifting from professional to attentive. Yes, ma'am. It looks like all previous authorizations tied to your corporate account were revoked as of 4 o'clock this afternoon. We will need a new method of payment for the full balance of $5,200. The silence that landed was absolute. My father's face went from flushed to pale in seconds. There must be an error, he muttered, reaching for a wallet I knew was empty. The manager shook his head. No error, sir. The account holder terminated the subscription. My mother looked at me, her smile finally shattered. Olivia, what is the meaning of this? You're embarrassing us in front of everyone. I met her gaze with clinical clarity. I'm not doing anything, Stephanie. I'm just not doing what you expected. I'm done being the silent investor in a family that only recognizes my value when I foot the bill. Catherine jumped up, her face contorted with panic. You can't do this. My trip. The $40,000 deposit. You promised. I looked at her, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the quiet patio. I didn't promise anything, Catherine. You forged my signature for that deposit. That's not a family matter. That's a felony. The manager waited, his presence a silent demand for payment. My mother's hands trembled as she realized there was no easy daughter left to fix the mess. Catherine's boyfriend, sensing the total collapse of their virtual empire, stood up awkwardly and muttered about a phone call before walking away. I stood up, placed $20 on the table for my tea, and looked at them one last time. Love doesn't come with an invoice, I said. And I've stopped paying yours. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them to face the questions they didn't have the money to answer. I didn't turn around when I heard Stephanie call my name one last time. Her voice didn't have the usual edge of command or the honeyed layer of manipulation, it sounded small, hollow, and utterly uncertain. Outside the restaurant, the air felt cooler and lighter, as if the very atmosphere had been cleansed of the heavy scent of butter, wine, and entitlement. I knew this wasn't the end of the noise, I knew the phones would ring, the messages would flood in, and the accusations of being a heartless daughter would fly, but the system had finally broken. And once a system of draining like that is dismantled, nothing ever works the same again. The fallout arrived in waves over the next few days. It started with short, urgent texts, then moved to missed calls, and eventually ended with long, rambling emails that began with a "we love you," and ended with sharp reminders of everything they had ever done for me. I didn't respond to any of them. It wasn't out of spite or a desire to hurt them, it was out of the certainty that I had already given them $180,000 worth of my life. I had no more compassion credits to lend. Without my quiet infrastructure supporting them, their world shifted with terrifying speed. The confidence my parents wore like a designer coat began to crack. Dinners at places like the Gilded Vine stopped entirely. Catherine's boyfriend, the one who nodded at her every word, disappeared from family conversations the moment he realized the luxury boat charters and five-star hotels were a mirage. He wasn't in love with her, he was in love with the lifestyle my money had provided. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the sunset with Caleb, and realized I felt no guilt. I had spent years imagining this moment, thinking it would feel like a tragedy, but it felt like a balance sheet finally reaching zero. I opened my laptop and went to the folder I had labeled Infrastructure. I stared at the numbers one last time, the documented history of every dollar taken under the guise of family loyalty. Then, I hit delete. This was the moment I understood the illusion of power of an empty wallet, the illusion of power that an empty wallet provides. My family had spent years confusing having with being. They believed their social status and their ability to order the most expensive bottle on the menu made them superior, but that position was merely a veneer they had rented using my hard work. When the money stopped, they were forced to face the reality that they had no internal value, no resilience, and no character to stand on once the bank account was empty. Their power had never been theirs, it was a temporary loan they had no intention of paying back. At home, life became quiet in a way that didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. Caleb and I ate simple dinners without rushing to answer a frantic emergency call about a credit card limit. For the first time in my adult life, my time and my resources belonged solely to me. I didn't cut my family off with a scream, I just stopped cushioning the edges of their bad choices. I stopped paying the invoices for a love they never actually gave. If they reached out, I answered with the truth. If they asked for help, I said no without an explanation. I learned that boundaries are not walls built to keep people out, they are doors that you alone choose when to open. And once you close a door that has been draining your spirit for years, the silence on the other side is the greatest inheritance you could ever receive. If you've ever been the one who always shows up, always pays, and always fixes the messes that no one else wants to face, I want you to hear this clearly: you are not selfish for stopping. You are not cruel for choosing your own future over their convenience. You are allowed to set boundaries, even, and especially, with family. If this story felt familiar to you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next lesson in reclaiming your worth.